Relative clauses. This is the house that Jack built. The girl who plays soccer bought the book. I like the man whose hat is green. The store that my friend recommended was closed. Where are the eggs that were in the fridge? Relative clauses, as you can see, consists of two words. Let's look at the clause part first. A clause is a group of words that has a subject and a verb, but it's not a sentence by itself. It's part of a larger sentence. So, for example, I was running before he called me. It's one sentence, but it has two clauses. I was running has a subject and a verb, and he called me also has a subject and a verb. So there are two clauses in the same sentence. Or if he is late, I won't see him. One sentence, two different clauses. Or I am hungry and he is angry. Here we have two different clauses joined by and. Relative clauses are different than these other clauses, though. Relative clauses are embedded in the noun phrase. So the girl who plays soccer bought the book. You can see here that the girl who plays soccer, all of this together is one noun phrase. All of this together is the subject of the sentence. Or the cat killed the rat that ate the malt. So all of this together is part of the object, and it's embedded in the noun phrase of the rat. Relative clauses usually directly follow nouns or noun phrases, or in the case of restrictive relative clauses, indefinite pronouns like something or everyone. We'll talk about the difference between restrictive and non-restrictive relative clauses a little bit later. So that's the clause part. Now the relative. A relative clause contains a relative pronoun, either who, whom, which, that, whose, where, when, or why. Relative pronouns relate to the noun before them. So this is the house that Jack built. That relates to house. The girl who plays soccer bought the book. Who relates to the girl. Relative clauses can be made by combining two sentences. So here we have, this is the house. Jack built the house. We combine Jack built the house into the noun phrase, and we have, this is the house that Jack built. Or this is the girl plays soccer. We combine these two sentences inside of each other, and we have, the girl who plays soccer bought the book. Now, there's a difference between subject relative clauses and object relative clauses. Let's look at an example. The girl kissed the boy. Here, the girl is the subject of the sentence. The boy kissed the girl. Here, the girl is the object. This is the girl. The girl kissed the boy. Again, with the girl functioning as the subject of this sentence. We have, this is the girl that kissed the boy. Now, this is the girl. The boy kissed the girl. Here we have the girl as the object of this sentence. Becomes, this is the girl that the boy kissed. So notice in both of these cases, the word that is right next to girl. And the word that means girl here. The word that refers to girl in both cases, and it's next to girl in both cases. But in the subject case, the subject slot here is left blank. This is the girl that kissed the boy. So we have that, but then there's nothing else here in the subject slot. It's left blank. Here in the object slot, we have, this is the girl that the boy kissed. So we have that here, but then nothing in the object slot. So this is different in some languages. In some languages, you would repeat the subject or the object here, but in English, you don't. The subject or the object is replaced by the relative pronoun and then deleted from the sentence. Let's look again at the different structures. When that is operating as the subject of the relative clause, we have the relative pronoun that refers to the girl, and then we have the verb. When it's operating as the object, we have, so the relative pronoun is in the subject position in this case. When it's operating as the object, we have the relative pronoun. Then we have the subject of the clause, and then we have the verb. And this would be the structure when the relative pronoun is in the object position. Now, I've been saying object here, but if we want to get technical, this is what we would call a direct object as opposed to an indirect object. So the subject position, this is the girl that kissed the boy. The object position, this is the girl that the boy kissed. However, as you know, noun phrases can function as more than just subjects and objects. They can be indirect objects, and a relative pronoun can actually have the indirect object position. So this is the girl. The boy gave the girl a message. So here, the girl is actually the indirect object. A message is the object, but the girl would be the indirect object. And this becomes, this is the girl that the boy gave a message to, with that now referring to the indirect object position. Now, it can also be the object of the preposition. So this is the girl. The boy took the candy from the girl. From here, the object, the girl here is the object of the preposition from. So this would be, this is the girl that the boy took the candy from, except there is an old rule in English grammar that you're not supposed to end a sentence with a preposition. It's an older rule. It's not usually followed nowadays, or most people aren't too strict about that. But if you want to keep that rule, then you'd have to move from over here. And this is the girl from whom the boy took the candy. And because it's more formal, we need to change it to from whom. Or the relative pronoun could be a possessive noun. So this is the girl. The girl's hat is blue becomes, this is the girl whose hat is blue. Or the relative pronoun could be the object of comparison. So this is the girl. The boy is taller than the girl. Could become, this is the girl who the boy is taller than. Now, this last one maybe sounds a little bit strange in English. So I'm going to put a question mark next to it, although you can find this sometimes, especially in written English, in novels, for example, they might use it, but it's not terribly common. So here we have all of these laid out in what linguists have called the accessibility hierarchy of relative clauses. So all languages that allow relative clauses, that have relative clauses in the subject position. Some of them have it in the direct object position. Some of those have it in the indirect object position. Fewer have it as the object of preposition, the possessive noun, and the object of comparison. So the ones near the top are the most common in languages. And as we get near the bottom, they're the least common. Linguists also believe, have studied, that if a language allows a relative clause in one of these positions lower down on the hierarchy, it will also allow them higher up. So for example, any language that allows a relative clause as the object of the preposition, a relative pronoun as the object of the preposition, will also allow it as an indirect object and a direct object and a subject. English, as you can see, is very versatile with relative pronouns. Now, this last one is marked here by a question mark, but it does have all the possible positions that are permitted by world languages. And again, this is not true of all languages. There are a number of languages that are not as flexible with relative pronouns, and this could be a difficulty for students learning English. Another interesting thing about relative clauses is they can be embedded inside another relative clause. So for example, this is the girl that kissed the boy. We can actually put another relative clause inside that. So this is the boy, this is the girl that kissed the boy that helped the man. So that here refers to boy, that helped the man is describing boy. And we can put another relative clause at the end of that. This is the girl that kissed the boy that helped the man that had lost his dog. Now this relative clause is referring to man. And in theory, there's no limit to how long we can make this sentence. And in fact, this is demonstrated by a popular nursery rhyme. This is the house that Jack built, which goes, this is the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. This is the rat that ate the malt that lay in the house that Jack built. And it keeps getting longer and longer and longer until the final verse of this nursery rhyme is, this is the horse and the hound and the horn that belonged to the farmer sowing his corn, that kept the rooster that crowed in the morn, that woke the priest all shaven and shorn, that married the man all tattered and torn, that kissed the maiden all forlorn, that milked the cow with the crumpled horn, that tossed the dog, that worried the cat, that killed the rat, that ate the malt, that lay in the house that Jack built. Just continues getting longer and longer and longer here. Sorry, just realized that there's a mistake there. Should have a T. Now, this is not something you would want to do in formal English writing. These long run-on sentences are not supposed to be good formal English writing, but it can work grammatically. Although part of the reason this works is because the relative clauses here all come at the end of the sentence. If they get stuck in the middle of the sentence, it works a little bit less well. So the girl that kissed the boy that helped the man that lost his dog bought a book. It's not wrong, but because there's such a distance now between the main subject and the predicate, it's a bit of a strain on short-term memory, and it makes the sentence a little bit difficult to understand or a little bit confusing. It's not technically wrong, but it's probably to be avoided if you want to use clear English sentences. Next, we're going to talk about restrictive relative clauses. Now, I've got three words here: restrictive, defining, and identifying. And they all mean the same thing, but different grammar books will use different words. Some grammar books will say restrictive relative clauses. some grammar books will say defining relative clauses, and some grammar books will say identifying relative clauses. So I've put all three words here to help you, but just be aware that different grammar books will use different words. Let's look at two different sentences here. The man who is wearing a, sorry, that should be green. Ugh. The man who is wearing a green jacket took my phone. I don't know how that got changed to repent. The man who is wearing a green jacket took my phone. Susan, who is wearing a green jacket, took my phone. Now, in the first one, this acts as what we call a restrictive or identifying or a defining relative clause, because without this, we don't know who the man is. If I just say, the man took my phone, you would say, what man? Who? What are you talking about? I don't know any man. But if I say the man who is wearing a green jacket, then this helps to identify the man. In the second one, we have Susan, who is wearing a green jacket, took my phone. Now, in this case, we already know who the person is. She's Susan. We already know her. We know her name. We know who she is. So in this case, the relative clause is adding extra information. And extra information relative clauses can be easily left out of the sentence. So I could say, Susan took my phone, and it would make perfect sense. Whereby I said, the man took my phone, it wouldn't make sense unless you knew who the man was. The extra information relative clauses, by the way, would be called non-defining, or non-identifying, or non-restrictive. So let's look at examples of restrictive or defining or identifying relative clauses. People who exercise live longer. Now, notice again, if I get rid of this who exercise, I just say people live longer, it doesn't make any sense. You'd be saying, what people? Live longer than who? But if you put in who exercise, then it restricts the meaning. So if you say just people live longer, the meaning is too general, but with who exercises, it's restricting the meaning. Or I don't like stories that have unhappy endings. Now, again, if you just say, I don't like stories, it doesn't really make sense because everybody likes stories. But if you say, I don't like stories that have unhappy endings, then we've restricted the type of stories that you're talking about. So again, a restrictive relative clause. We know a lot of people who live in London. Again, this is restricting the meaning of people. This is the worst film that I've ever seen. And again, notice here that if without the relative clause, if we just say this is the worst film, it doesn't really make sense. But that I've ever seen restricts the meaning. The opposite, of course, is non-restrictive, non-defining, or non-identifying, what I'm going to call extra information relative clauses. Tom's father, who is 78, goes swimming every day. So we already know who it is. It's Tom's father. He only has one father. Yesterday, I met John, who told me he was getting married. Again, we already know who this is. This is John. We know his name, so it's extra information. Last night, I went to Anne's party, which we enjoyed very much. Okay, again, we already know which party. It's Anne's party. So this is just extra information. Here's an interesting case of two sentences that have the same words, but the grammar changes the meaning. The first one has no commas. So if there are no commas, it's considered restrictive. So the riders who completed the race were exhausted. The second one has commas. So we'd say the riders who completed the race were exhausted. So the same words, but different meanings. Here, it means that we're only talking about the riders who completed the race. So there were a number of riders. Some of them completed the race, some of them didn't, but this sentence is talking about the ones that completed. Here, because this is being given as extra information, it means that all of the people in this group had completed the race. So this is restricting the meaning of this noun to just ones who completed the race. And this one is implying that all of them completed the race. Now, if they have exactly the same words and the same grammar, how do you tell which one is restrictive and which one is non-restrictive? Well, in writing, you would indicate it by the commas. So in writing, the extra information is set apart by commas. In speech, it is set apart by a small pause and lower intonation. So for example, Susan, who is wearing a green jacket, took my phone. There's a small pause at both of these points, and the intonation goes down. So to compare, the riders who completed the race were exhausted. The riders who completed the race were exhausted. Now, only restrictive relative clauses can be used with indefinite pronouns, things like somebody, anybody, everything. So a role model is someone who makes a difference in people's lives. It's a restrictive relative clause because we have someone here. Everything that you want is here. Again, everything, someone, indefinite pronouns, you can only use restrictive relative clauses with them. The extra information relative clauses, non-defining, non-identifying, non-restrictive, are considered more formal, and consequently, they are less frequent in informal speech. Next, let's talk about when you can omit the relative pronoun. Here's a sentence: the man who I saw was on holiday. Relative pronoun is who, but the sentence is okay without who. You can say the man I saw was on holiday without the who, and it still makes perfect sense, and it still sounds fine. It still sounds grammatically fine. So we can get rid of the relative pronoun in certain cases. In order to omit the relative pronoun, one, it must be a defining relative clause. Again, defining, identifying, restrictive, whichever name you use. And two, the relative pronoun must refer to the object of the relative clause. So here, the man who I saw was on holiday. It's a defining clause. It identifies which man it is. We have who I saw, which translates to I saw the man, who here is in the object position. So we can get rid of the relative pronoun. We can say the man I saw was on holiday. Now, this is an interesting little feature of English grammar, which I find very interesting because native speakers of English do this all the time without even needing to think about the grammar. They don't actually need to stop and think to themselves, is who here the subject or is it the object? There's just something in their brain which is doing this automatically. I don't know how it works, but it's fascinating to think how language works in the mind of a proficient speaker. Students of English, non-native speakers who are studying it as a second language, often will not be able to do this automatically. They'll need to think through this carefully. Now, it seems to me like it's a minor point of English grammar, but for some reason, omitting the relative pronoun does seem to pop up a lot in English language textbooks for foreign students who are learning English. So if you need to study this for the test or whatever reason as a student of English, or if you're a teacher, I actually made up a checklist that I used with my students. So here's an example. Tom's father, who is 78, goes swimming every day. Is it defining or non-defining? It's non-defining. It's extra information. So can you omit the relative pronoun? No, only in restrictive or defining clauses. All right, here's another example. I don't like stories that have unhappy endings. Is it defining or non-defining? Okay, it's defining, so we need to think about the structure. The relative clause is that have unhappy endings. Relative pronoun is that. That is referring to stories, so we can rewrite it as stories have unhappy endings. So stories here, is it the subject or the object of the clause? Stories have unhappy endings. It's the subject. So we cannot omit it because we only omit the object pronouns. Okay, here's another example. I didn't get the job that I wanted. It's defining. So the relative clause, that I wanted, relative pronoun is that. That is referring to the job. So it's I wanted the job would be the rewritten relative clause. We can see here that the job is in the object position in this phrase. So we can actually omit it because you can omit the relative pronoun when it's in the object position. So I didn't get the job that I wanted. Or you could say, I didn't get the job I wanted. And they both are perfectly fine. They both sound perfectly fine. Now, if you're a student of English and all of this is very confusing for you, don't worry about it too much because you don't have to omit it. It's fine either way. That I wanted is fine, or I wanted is fine. Both are okay. Another thing that you can do, if all those calculations are a bit much, is just remember what we looked at earlier. Subject position relative pronouns are relative pronouns immediately followed by the verb. Object position relative pronouns would be relative pronouns followed by the subject and then the verb. So you can just look at the structure. Let's talk about the relative pronouns. That can be used for things or for people in restrictive relative clauses. So the girl that plays soccer bought a coffee. Here, that is referring to the girl, a person, but the bus that hit me was driving too fast. Here, that is referring to the bus, a thing. It can be used for people or things. Now, in both of these cases, that is more informal than who or which. So if we say the girl who plays soccer, it's a little bit more formal. That is a little bit more informal. The bus which hit me is a little bit more formal. That is more informal. We can use who or whom for people. So this is the girl who plays soccer. This is the man whom Jack helped. Now, whom is used for people when the relative pronoun is in the object position. So Jack helped the man. It's the object, so we can use whom. However, as you may be aware, the difference between who and whom, who being the subject, whom being the object, is an older rule in English that is very seldom followed nowadays, except for formal situations. So in normal English conversation, you could just as easily say, this is the man who Jack helped. You can use who or that for people, but you can't use which for people. In restrictive clauses, either that or which can be used to refer to things. So I work for a company which makes boxes, or I work for a company that makes boxes. Either one is okay. My book, which is on my shelf, or my book that is on my shelf, either one is okay here. That would be more common. Which usually sounds more formal in these situations. However, in extra information relative clauses, non-defining, non-restrictive, or non-identifying, you must use who or which instead of that. Sorry, that's a mistake. Not only about people. About people or things, we have to use who or which instead of that. So John, who works as a tour guide, recently lost his phone. Because this is a extra information, non-defining, we can't use that here. John that works as a tour guide sounds strange. It needs to be who. Here, Coca-Cola, which is a very famous company, is hiring now. Everybody knows what Coca-Cola is. This is just extra information. So we have to use which, we can't use that. Another thing about which is it can sometimes be used to refer to the whole clause, not just the noun phrase. So he eats donuts for breakfast, which is very unhealthy. Here, which is not only referring to breakfast, it's referring to the whole thing about eating donuts for breakfast. So it's commenting on the whole phrase, not just the noun phrase. Next, whose is used for possessives. So this is the man, his hat is yellow. His can change to whose. This is the man whose hat is yellow. Or these are people, their cars are fast. So these are people whose cars are fast. Here, their changes to whose. Now, whose doesn't actually move around by itself. It moves around with the noun it is attached to. So when it's the subject, it looks like this. This is the man, his hat is yellow. This is the man whose hat is yellow. But when the whose plus noun is an object, like this is the man, I took his hat. His hat here is as the object, it's what I took. Then we move both whose and the noun up to the front of the clause. So this is the man whose hat I took. Now, if it's as the object of the preposition, this is the man I left with his hat. Once again, we move both whose and hat up to the front. So whose moves to the front of the clause, just like the relative pronoun is always in the front of the clause, but it takes the noun with it. Now, again, if you remember that old rule that a lot of people don't follow anymore, but is still in some grammar books, that we shouldn't end a sentence with a preposition, then you'd have to move the preposition as well. So you get, this is the man with whose hat I left. We usually avoid whose when talking about a thing. It's for people. So I bought a book whose cover was very beautiful. This sounds a bit strange in English. So we'd either have to split it into two clauses. I bought a book and its cover was very beautiful. Or we would say, I bought a book, the cover of which was very beautiful. Of which can be used to substitute in these cases. However, we can actually use whose with animals. So I like the dog whose tail is long. And it also can be used for countries, towns, or organizations. So China, whose population is very large, recently changed its birth control policy. Now, whose is often felt to be very formal. So in informal speech, it might feel a little bit strange to use it, and other grammar structures might be more natural. For example, I have a friend whose car is very fast, feels a little bit too formal for everyday conversation. So you could just use with. I have a friend with a fast car in this case. Next, let's talk about relative adverbial clauses. These are still relative clauses, but they're now performing an adverbial function. For example, clauses that begin with where. So where is used to talk about a place. This is the house where I grew up. Now, where is a little bit tricky, so you have to be careful with it. It substitutes for what would be here or there in a full sentence. So this is the house where I grew up would be I grew up there, or I grew up here. It can also be substituted for in which or that in. So this is the house where I grew up. This is the house in which I grew up, or this is the house that I grew up in. So with which or that, we have to add the preposition in. Also, we only use where when the noun is being conceptualized as a place, when we're thinking of it as a place. If we're thinking of it as a thing, then we would use that or which. So for example, this is the school where the children study. The children study inside the school. The school is the place in which this happens. This is the school that my brother hates. So it's still the same noun, it's still the school, but here we are not imagining it so much as a place. We're imagining it as the object of my brother's hate. Or to put it another way, my brother doesn't hate in the school. In the school is not the place where the hate happens. It's just the thing that my brother hates. And again, another check you can do on this is see if you can substitute there. So the children study there, so we can use where here. My brother hates there. Well, he doesn't hate there, he hates the school. So this is the school that my brother hates. Now, in formal English, advanced English, where is also used to refer to a number of different things, such as cases, conditions, examples, situations, or systems. For example, I would hate having a job where I had to wake up early. Next, when. When is used to talk about a time. So I'm looking forward to the day when I can leave this town. Or do you know the day when the essay is due? And then why. Why is a bit of a special case. It's used after reason. So the reason why nobody likes Eric is because he's so arrogant. Now, with these relative adverb clauses, you can actually delete the adverb. So I'm looking forward to the day when I can leave this town. You can get rid of the when. I'm looking forward to the day I can leave this town. The reason why nobody likes Eric is because he's so arrogant. The reason nobody likes Eric is because he's so arrogant. This is similar to what we talked about before with omitting the relative pronoun. You can also delete these relative adverbs. Where is an exception to this case, though? This is the house where I grew up. This is the house I grew up. This one sounds strange without the where. Although we could fix it by adding in. So this is the house I grew up in. There's also a head noun deletion rule for relative adverbial clauses, which means when the relative adverb and the noun are next to each other and they mean the same thing, we can get rid of the noun. So this is the house where I grew up can become this is the house where I grew up. Do you know the day when the essay is due? Do you know when the essay is due? I know the reason why you failed. I know why you failed. Last thing we're going to talk about is reduced relative clauses. So with the present participle, we have the girl dancing with your brother is famous. We have dancing here as a present participle. We have dancing here as a present participle, but it's actually a relative clause in disguise. It's the girl who is dancing. But when we have a present participle, we can just delete the who and the be verb, the relative pronoun and the be verb. Also with the past participle, we said most of the people invited to the party didn't come. It's actually a relative clause in disguise using the passive, who were invited. But we can delete the who, and we can delete the be verb, and we can just have invited. And there's one more. The actor famous for appearing in superhero movies came to the party is actually the actor who is famous for appearing in superheroes movies came to the party. Another relative clause in disguise. So the rule here is as there is a relative pronoun plus a be verb plus a complex adjective phrase, famous for appearing in superhero movies. So an adjective with a whole complex phrase on there. Then you can delete the relative pronoun and the be verb and just go with the adverb. Sorry, go with the adjective, the actor famous for appearing in superhero movies. So this is the end. Here is a bibliography of some of the books I used to put this together if you're looking for further reading. The grammar book by Marianne Selce-Murcia and Diane Larson Freeman. Chomsky's Universal Grammar. This is where the accessibility hierarchy of relative clauses comes from, or where I got it from, although it's actually also in the grammar book as well. Practical English Usage by Michael Swan, English Grammar and Use by Raymond Murphy, and Advanced Grammar and Use by Martin Hewings. Please check out any of these books for more information.